Hello friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel, The Zone of Anatomy, and today we are going to discuss about a topic, reflex. As we have already know that the reflex topic is the subtopic of our nervous system, so it is the continuation of nervous system series itself. So guys, let's discuss what is the reflex and what is the its reflex arc as well as type of reflexes which we see. So let's proceed. So these are the classification of reflexes. When we talk about the reflex, that what is a reflex? So basically we say that the reflex are involuntary movement. What does involuntary means? It means the movements which are not in our control, and these involuntary movement response due to any sensory stimuli is called reflection. For example, we can take, suppose there is a hot flame and we suddenly put our hand over it. So the reflex activity by our nervous system come into play and we suddenly withdraws our hand. So this complete action is known as the reflex action. Therefore, we call it as the involuntary movement. When we talk about the type of reflexes or the classification of the reflexes, we say that the reflexes on the basis of the clinical type, First one is clinical. Second is the number of synapses. We have already know what are the synapses. If you don't know, just watch the lecture on this. Then the another classification is physiological classification. Then we have the acquired and anatomical classification. So once we have done with these classification, amongst these, the most important ones to know is this one. That is our clinical classification, because there are 4 subgroups, and second important one is number of synapses. All these reflexes, that is physiological reflexes, acquired and anatomical, they are not as much as important when compared to these two. So for exam point of view, you need to learn these two only. So here I have already mentioned what are the important points you need to remember about the acquired reflex. First is it is true type, that is unconditional. Unconditioned means that is present in the inborns. That are natural reflexes, which are present when the baby is born, when at the time of birth. So these reflexes do not acquire any learning objective or any learning condition or any learning training. So if we see the example, so when the baby is born and we put any sweet dish in front of him or her, like if I put chocolate or a cake in front of a baby, he or she started secreting a saliva without knowing that what is the actual taste of that particular substance is. So this type of reflex is the unconditioned reflex, and it is present in our inborn. When we talk about condition, it means the acquired. It is a type of reflexes that are developed after training or after when the person is in its adulthood, after the learning procedure or after certain point of training, this type of reflex is arise. So if I put a delicious food in front of a person, he or she started salivating by seeing it or by the thought of it, it started salivation. So this is what is known as the acquired. The acquired reflex is also termed as the conditioned reflex, or it is a subgroup of um, conditioned reflex. So do not get confused, because in few textbook it is written as acquired and somewhere it is recorded as put as conditioned one. So both are the same thing. Then we come to the anatomical. So in anatomical, we just need to remember these names. What are these? First is cerebellar. If you see the previous video on our brain, we have already discussed all these part over there. So just go and watch that video. I have put the link in the description box. So when we talk about the cerebellar reflexes, these are the reflexes whose center is in cerebellum. Then cortical reflexes whose Reflexes are in cerebral cortex, midbrain, the reflexes which are present in the midbrain. Then we have medullary reflexes whose reflexes is present in our medulla oblongata. Then coming to the spinal reflexes are of three types: segmental, intersegmental, and suprasegmental reflexes. Why these segmentals? Because our spinal cord is divided into many segments. So depending upon the segments, spinal nerves is divided into segmental, intersegmental, and suprasegmental. So these are the things which we need to remember. Coming to a physiological reflex, we have classified into two, that is flexor and extensor. What is flexor? Flexors are mainly protective reflexes. So the another name of flexor is protective flexor. Write it as an MCQ. It might come. So the property of this is to protect the body from harmful stimuli. These reflexes is also, since it protects the body from harmful reflex, okay, so it is also known as what? Withdrawal reflex. So flex, another name of flexor reflex is withdrawal reflex, and it is also known as protective reflex. So these are basically involved in the flexion of our muscles. So then we already know what are the other names of flexor. That is, one is protective, another is withdrawal reflex. Just remember these two nickname of this flexor. Coming to the extensor, extensor is also known as anti-gravity flexion. Why anti-gravity? Because it is work against the gravity. These reflexes are important because it contract the muscles during the extension in the joint. So when there is extension in the joints, these reflexes extend. These reflexes basically extends our joint, or we say the contract our joint during the extension. So these two are the important, and only thing which we need to remember is their nicknames. So just go through it. Now, moving forward, we'll now see the type of clinical reflexes. Clinical reflexes are superficial reflex, then pathological reflex, visceral reflex, and deep reflex. Let's see what are these. First, we have the superficial reflex. What this superficial reflex means? The super reflexes are those reflexes that are present on the surface of the body. Superficial reflexes are basically concerned with our mucous membrane or with our skin. So you can see over here that we have a needle and we are just dragging over this portion of our foot, and this one also, it is the reflection that is caused. So this is our superficial reflex. So superficial reflex is concerned with our mucous membrane and skin, and its type, when we talk about its type, it is plantar reflex. Then we have abdominal reflex. Then we have a corneal reflex. Then we have a cremasteric reflex and conjunctival reflex. So you just need to know the names of these reflexes in this, and nothing more to worry about in this. When we talk about the plantar reflex, it is concerned with our foot, as we see in the previous slide. Abdominal reflex concerned with our abdominal part, corneal by cornea, and so the name suggested in further. So these are the reflexes. Just remember their name and nothing more in detail you need to understand about it. And the another thing you need to remember, the nicknames which I've already told. So here we complete with these reflexes. Now, moving forward, we have a deep reflex. What are the deep reflex? Deep reflexes are the reflexes that are now are another reflex, that is the deep reflex. So deep reflexes are those reflexes that are present in our tendons. You can see that the doctor is hammering over this. So it is basically, present in our knee jerks, at the ankle or biceps, tricep point. So these are the deep reflexes. So deep reflexes are also known as the stretch reflexes, which are due to tapping over the tendon. So the thing you need to remember about deep reflexes, it is concerned with the tendon, and the type of deep reflexes is knee jerk, biceps, triceps jerk, ankle jerk. That's the only thing you need to remember over this. So deep jerks, these are the stretch reflexes, MCQ, which are produced by tapping the tendons, MCQ. Clinical tested reflexes, knee, ankle, bicep, tricep, and jaws. Now, we are going to study what are the visceral reflexes. Visceral reflexes are those reflexes that are a least, or we can say that are part of the reflex is formed by autonomic nervous. So visceral nerve is concerned with our nervous system, and reflex action, like visceral reflexes are reflexes that are arises from our pupil or the visceral organs. So these are the things which we need to just go through it or read it once, nothing more to explain more in these. So after done with this, moving forward, visceral reflexes, as I say, it is by the autonomic nervous system, and the type are micturition reflexes, that the urge of urination, then the baroreceptor, pupillary, and the vomiting reflex is a type of visceral reflex. Then we have our pathological reflexes. Pathological reflexes are the reflexes that are due to our pathological condition, that arises due to the pathological condition. Here in the diagram, you can see one reflex, that is Babinski sign. So normally in a textbook, we get three types of pathological reflex. One is Babinski, then pendular, and another is clonus. So the most important one you need to remember is Babinski reflex. What is Babinski reflex? It is basically the abnormal plantar reflex. It is concerned with our foot or the lower extremity part. It is called Babinski because it is named after its scientist name, and the scientist name is Joseph Babinski. So in Babinski sign, usually there is the dorsiflexion of great toe and fanning of the toes. You can see there is the fanning of the toes, but this one is the negative because there is no fanning of the toes taking place. So the one condition which you see when we talk about the Babinski is that the toes are of fan shape and there is the dorsiflexion. So you can see there is the dorsiflexion part and there is a fan shape. So this is considered as a positive Babinski sign, but here it is a negative because there is no fan shape and there is no dorsiflexion over here. Then one thing is Babinski sign is due to the upper motor neuron lesion that is basically present in our infants. And why the examiner may have asked the Babinski happen only in infants, because due to the presence of non-myelinated pyramidal tracts. So we have already discussed what are pyramidal tracts, what are myelination, what is non-myelination. If you haven't seen the video, just go and see our previous all the videos concerning with the nervous system. Moving forward, that what are the reflex arc? Reflex arc is the nervous pathway which is concerned with our reflex action. So the components of reflex arc is very simple. First, any stimuli comes, suppose this is a stimuli, the laser point is a stimuli, it comes over here. So these stimuli get, receptors take these stimuli. So receptor is the end organ. Okay, impulse are generated in different afferent nerves, we know. Then these sensory neurons come into play. Now, when we talk about the components of this, what we say reflex arc. So first we have divided basically into three parts. First is afferent, that is consist of our afferent means that are taking the stimulus to the brain and the spinal cord. First is our receptor, that is our sense organ. Then there is the afferent neuron. This taking place and the sensory neuron which is basically taking place. Then there is the center. This portion complete is our center, where it consists of one or more synapse. Here you can see there is the synapse which are located with, as I see that it is taken into spinal cord and then into the brain. So it can be present in brain or the spinal cord. Then once it is get synapsed, then we have an efferent limb. Efferent means that the action is going. So we have efferent neuron over here, and then the organ on efferent. Basically, it is muscles and the glands, which is efferent part. So these are efferent neurons. This is efferent organ, that is muscles of the gland. So the components, or we say the pathway of the reflexor, is very simple. First stimuli come, then we have the sensory organ. Sensory organ means we have the receptor, then we have the afferent neurons, that is taking our neurons, then there is a synapse, then efferent part, then there is some neuromuscular junction. If you have studied about it, and if you're not, just go and see the previous lecture, entire neuromuscular junction, and then there is the action on this efferent or the muscle efferent organ, or the which we can say muscles and the gland. So this is everything we need to remember about this reflex arc. Now moving forward, let's see what are the type of reflex arc. When we talk about the type of reflex arc or the levels or the classification of reflexor, we simply say that first we have the monosynaptic. What is mono means? Mono means one, and what is synaptic means synapses. So what does it means? That it has two neurons, okay, and it has one synapse. You see that it has one synapse as well as it has two neurons over it. Then when we come, then there is another one, that is the monosynaptic reflex is basically concerned with our stretch reflexes, which we see in our deep reflexes part, that knee jerk and jaw jerk type. Then there is, as we say, there is one synapse and we have two neurons. Then here, what is this polysynaptic? Polysynaptic means there is more than three neurons. Here you can see one neuron, two neuron, three neuron, four neuron, and there is more than two synapses. So there are two synapses point. One is over here. So this is polysynaptic reflex arc. So things to remember: in mono we have only one synapse. In poly we have two. One synapse over here, one synapse over here. So these poly is present in our, when we need to withdraw our hand. Remember, when we started this lecture, I gave you an example of that flame and the hand. So when we withdraw our hand, that reflex is known as the withdrawal reflex. So these are what we need to learn. Now, let's broadly see what are these stretch receptors is all about. So when we talk about stretch receptor, what is the stretch receptor? So stretch receptors, when suppose our skeletal muscles with an intact nerve supply, or we say when our stretched muscle or the skeletal muscles is stretched, it contracts. When it is stretched, it contracts, and this response is called the stretch reflex. What is the another name of stretch reflex? The another name is myotactic reflex. Write it down, it might come in the MCQ. Then its stimulus, the stimulus very easy. The stimulus is our stretch of like stretching of our muscles is its stimulus. What is its response? As we say, it contracts. Sense organ is similar, our muscles, and its clinical examples when we see that the stretch receptors are of knee jerk. Then we have our ankle jerk, triceps, biceps, jaws. These are when we talk about the pathway. So what are its pathways? Suppose we have the muscles. Okay, so our muscles get stretched. Once our muscle gets stretched, there is the elongation in the muscles spindles. Then there is the stimulation of the muscle spindles. So one muscle spindles get stretched. You can see here the muscle spindles get stretched over here. Then the another point which come is that sensory impulse. Once the stretch impulse get started, it then the another point which come is that sensory impulse goes to our central nervous system by what? By our fast sensory fibers. What fibers it is taking? If you remember the type of fibers, when we talk of the type of fibers, we say the type of fiber which is taking the fast sensation is type 1A fiber. Go and see that lecture also. It may be clear to you over here. Then these type 1A fibers directly synapses with our horn cells of the spinal cord. Then it get synapse over the horn cells, and then motor impulses. Here you can see that it synapse over here. Then our motor impulse come into play. Then motor impulse passes to the muscle fibers. Here you say by the anterior horn part. And then there is the contraction which takes place over here. So you can see that the muscles or the hamstring muscles they are mentioning over here, it's contract. So what we say that first the stimuli comes. Once the stimuli come, then the stimulus of the muscle spindles basically stretch this receptors, and then this stretching goes to our central nervous system where it sends the signals over here. Then these signals is sent by the fibers known as 1A fiber that gets synapsed over here in the horn. Then the motor impulse come into play, and then it gets effect over here in our muscle, that is the contraction. So the thing you need to remember is that the result is the contraction, the stimulus are stretch in the muscles. So we are done with this part. Moving forward, now we need to see one more thing, that is a reciprocal innervation. So what are a reciprocal innervation is basically mean is, suppose there is the excitation of one group of muscles, okay, and there is often we say that there is an inhibition of another group of muscle. Means there is one group of muscle that is excitation and another which are in the inhibition part, okay. Then the stretch muscle reflexes exist on one reflexes. It often stimulates or inhibit, or it works as the antagonist muscle reflexes. This phenomena is known as the reciprocal reflex. So you just need to know what are these reflexes, what is the reciprocal reflex. Means just go through the definition when you see in the textbook. So we can say that the reciprocal innervation is concerned with our flexion and extension reflexes. Usually it excites one group of muscle and inhibit another group of muscle. Okay, so there is the antagonist group of muscles on the same side. If we have one excitatory muscle, then there we have another antagonist or one depressed type of muscle. Suppose we can say that this both of them work as antagonists. So this is what is the reflex, or the phenomena is known as the reciprocal reflex. Just read your textbook once, you can get a clear idea what this is all about. See, here is the stretching impulse. So we say that the stretching impulse is by the tendons. So there is a tapping of the tendon. The doctor is tapping over here, then the impulse come, then the similar story goes, that is a sensory neuron excited. Sensory neuron excited and the horns get stimulated, and then in the spinal cord there is an integration of information. Then these go into the motor neuron excite. Then there is an effector. Effector means that there is the contraction in our muscles. So this is the pathway which we have already done. But the only difference is in the reciprocal innervation, that one group of muscle is exciting and another is inhibiting, and it works as the antagonist to each other. Moving forward, that is cross extensor reflex. So cross extensor reflex. It is the withdrawal reflex. What does its withdrawal reflex means? That whenever there is the flexion, we say that the withdrawal reflex, or we can retract our hand over it. So with the suppose we can say over here that we get this stimuli. These red one are the inhibition stimuli which we are seeing, and the green one over here we see that the stimuli. So basically crossed stimuli. We talk about what is crossed extensor reflex. It is basically concerned with our withdrawal reflex, in which the flexors of the withdrawing limbs are excited, or we say that it is the flexure part is in the contraction. We see that here the flexion is usually contract over here, and the extensor are inhibited. So these extensor muscles over here, you see, they are inhibited, and here the flexors are contracted. So the two important thing you need to remember is in the cross extension, the flexor muscles contract and extensor muscles usually inhibit. Okay. This is what we need to remember. Whereas when we come to this one, that is a reciprocal inhibition, we say simply that the flexor, what we say the flexor muscles, or we say the flexor reflex is contracted and the extensor muscle is inhibited or relaxed. Whereas over here, the flexor is contracted and extensor flexor is I'm sorry. Here we can say that the flexor reflexes and the inhibitor relaxes. I hope you get this point. So just read it once so you get the clarification what are these or about. So we say flexors are excited or extensor are inhibited is the another point we say. Then we come to our another point, that is summation. So we have summation is basically a number of threshold stimuli applied to our afferent nerves, and it is basically of two types, that is spatial and another is temporal. So we see what are these here in the diagram. Just focused and remember what are spatial and what is temporal. First we see what is spatial. Suppose we have here A and B neurons. These A and B neuron A and B converge on neuron X. You see one part of B and one part of A converges over X. If A and B discharges one after the another, suppose A get discharged once and then B, then what happened in this is there is no production of impulse takes place, and if A and B is discharged at the same time, the two area gets depolarized and will be produced like the X do not work over here. So we can say here that neuron A and B converged on the neuron X. If A and B discharged one after the another, then there is no excitatory postsynaptic potential. We have already seen what are the postsynaptic potential is produced in X. And if in second condition, if A and B discharged at the same time, two areas of X get depolarized and their actions will be sum and like their whatever action will produce is total sum, and it produces our excitatory postsynaptic potential. So When A and B are discharged one after the another, no excitatory postsynaptic potential is produced in it. Whereas when A and B discharge on the same time, then they produces our excitatory postsynaptic potential. Another one we see the temporal. This is what is the spatial submission. Then we see what is temporal submission. The example of temporal submission which we can see is that suppose here neuron B diverge to X and Y over here. Okay, if B discharge or we say B get disconnected many a times, then X and Y will also discharge due to our temporal submission. So temporal submission is our successive discharge from a single presynaptic terminal. Okay, and it is like temporal is repeated discharge, whereas the spatial can be our we say it can be turn by turn also and at the same time. So here you see temporal submission, several impulses from one neuron over time is done, and spatial is on the same time which we see. So these are the things which I have put it over here, whatever we have discussed so far. First, we see the components of reflex arc. What are the components of the reflex arc? The components of the reflexes are first afferent one, which are taking the signals, that is receptor. Then we have the afferent. Then the center where it's synapse, there can be a spinal cord or our brainstem part. Then efferent, that is our efferent means that is taking signals back, that is our which act on efferent neurons and organ are can be muscles or glands. Then we have the type of reflexes, that is monosynaptic, which has two neurons and one synapse. Here you can say we have two inputs and one synapse over here. So it is stretch reflex. We see what are the stretch reflexes. Stretch reflexes are basically knee reflex, and knee reflex, jaw reflex, and it is concerned with our tendons. Then disynaptic. It means there is three neurons and two synapses. And example is cross reflex and extension reflex, which we have discussed already. Then we have polysynaptic, which means three neurons and two synapses. You see there are two, we have a three neurons and we have a two synapses. The example is basically our withdrawal reflex, and we have seen what is the withdrawal reflex is all about. Stretch reflex we have seen. So the important thing you need to remember is our knee reflex or stretch reflex, then withdrawal reflex. Just go to the basically why withdrawal reflex is like important is because it is stimulated our limb and it gets away from the source of irritation. So to avoid the injury, our this withdrawal reflexes put it there. And moving forward, the properties of reflex action, we see what is the summation. We see that it is a spatial and the temporal one. Then we see subliminal fringe, reciprocal innervation we saw. Then we see occlusion, one way of conduction, irritation, innervation, synaptic delay. The most important one which you need to remember are the one which I put it in the tick mark over here. So just guys, now open your textbook, read out the chapter once, you'll get the clarity over it. Just go through the reading and it is very easy to remember everything. Whatever the things are important, I put it in the slides. So just before your exam, brush your knowledge over it. So guys, that's all about this topic. If you like the content of the video, do like, share, subscribe, press the bell icon so you get notified whenever I put a new video. So put your views and let me know how what help you need from my side during the examination or what modification you want in the video. So I'm looking forward for your reflections over it. So that's for today. We'll meet another lecture with another topic. Till then, bye and take care.